How do you deal with a pile of quilts like this? They're messy, they're fraying at the edges, and they're just begging to be loved. And even just to iron these is probably going to take me about a week. But how can I deal with this pile and not just have it end up shoved in a cupboard to be found years later? And how can I be sure that this doesn't happen again? Let's find out. We love making quilts, but finishing them is hard. Our brains want to stick with shiny, shiny new and not boring, boring old. And how do you manage when you have a large number of whips just waiting to be sewn? So in 2021, I made 21 quilt tops. 18 of these were for pattern tests, and 3 of them were for my own patterns I had written. But only 4 of these have been finished, as in quilted and bound. Because I made so many of them in such quick succession, sometimes sewing 2 or 3 at a time and right into the wee hours of the night, I often found it impossible to finish a quilt all the way done. In short, I just took on way too much, more than I could possibly cope with all at one time. So I developed a coping strategy. Cut the fabric, sew the quilt top, take a photograph and shove it in a cupboard. And there, the whipped pile was born. And it wasn't until I went to put my Christmas fabrics from 2021 away that I realized I had a problem. There was no space for fabric. Now that's a problem. So let's first start by defining what a whip actually is. Now, a whip or work in progress quilt is something that I define as something that I have actively sewn or touched within the last 12 months. This could be a quilt top that has finished but not been sandwiched and quilted. It could be a quilt top that needs borders on it. It could be rows or columns of a quilt that need to be sewn together. Or it could just be a pile of fabric that's been cut but not sewn. Now, comparing that to how I define a UFO is something that I have not touched or sewn for longer than 12 months. And quite thankfully, I only have one of those lying around the house, which is 3.5 years old. So since it's been 12 months, or just about 12 months since I actively worked on these projects, I am defining them all as work in progresses. But call them what you like, it's how we deal with them that what actually matters. So why do we procrastinate finishing a quilt? Sometimes and often we actually have subconscious fears that are holding us back from finishing that project. The hidden meaning of the fear is lurking beneath the surface. We may be suffering from a fear of failure. Your beautifully sewn quilt doesn't look like the quilt pattern, or it doesn't look like that picture perfect quote on Instagram, or we don't want to be judged by other people if it doesn't impress them. Fear of failure can really hold you back from finishing a project because it's much easier to avoid it than to deal with it. Sometimes, like my situation, we're just simply overwhelmed with way too much going on in our lives or in our sewing rooms. But sometimes it's a little bit more sneaky. For example, you're making a quilt with your best sewing bud and you're having so much fun, laughing, chatting, sewing away together, just having a great time. But you know when the project comes to an end that you're not going to be spending as much time with your sewing buddy. So subconsciously your brain looks for ways to slow down or stop so that it prolongs how long the project lasts. Or maybe indecision is killing your sojo. How do I quilt it? What colour of thread do I use? What quilting design will I use? And how will it look? Is it going to screw the quilt up and make it look crap? All of these can just sap your sojo away. It can be any number of things. It can be any one of those things, or it can be all of the above things, or more things that we haven't discussed. But if you can sit down and understand the roots of the problem, then you're one step closer to overcoming it. For me personally, when it comes to procrastinating finishing a quilt, it's a couple of different reasons. One is a fear of failure. I find it very hard not to compare my quilts to those beautiful quilts that I see on Instagram and Pinterest, and I think I'm probably not alone when it comes to that. Second is I'm slightly overwhelmed just by the sheer volume of things that I need to finish. But there's a sneaky factor here hiding under the surface. Quilting a quilt top on my sewing machine is a painful process for me, and so my brain is trying its best to protect me from it by making me start other projects and not finish the ones that I've started. So it's all my brain's fault, not me. When it comes to me quilting on my domestic machine, I have problems with my quilt top getting stuck on the extension table. My stitches don't form evenly because it's stuck and it's either pushing or pulling through too quickly. Then my lines go wonky as it drags off to one side. On top of all of that, I get so tense that my shoulders end up to my ears and I just hate the experience. Therefore, I procrastinate not to do it. And that little devil on my shoulder says, don't finish that one, sew this one instead. So for me, the combinations of fear of failure, of being overwhelmed, and being spared from a painful process are all what leads to my procrastination. Now that we understand procrastination and the reasons behind it, or at least some of the reasons behind it, let's talk about how we can overcome it. So what are coping strategies for some of the common procrastination reasons that we've just discussed? If your excuse is that you are a perfectionist and you can't finish, then it's not really an excuse, I'm afraid. It's most likely that it's masking the real reason for your procrastination and the thing that is holding you back. And you need to look deeper into your brain to figure it out. Now I can sympathize because I have argued myself out of many actions over the course of my career for the excuse that I'm a perfectionist and I just can't do it to the standard that's good enough. But once you recognize this and you actually can understand the reasons underneath it, which is most likely a fear of failure in my case, then you can say to your brain and that you can try and then make a plan to overcome it. But being a perfectionist is a very difficult thing to cope with, and it's not something that's going to disappear overnight. But being aware of it and raising awareness of it and then adding to it a really solid plan to help you get through it is a good start. Now, as easy as this is for me to say, try to stop focusing on the negatives. It won't be good enough. Nobody will like it. It won't look like the pictures on Pinterest. Now, if I had $1 for every time I'd had one of those thoughts, then I would be filming this video in the Caribbean. Instead, I am in sunny Scotland where there are 60-mile-an-hour winds and sideways snow outside currently. But this is a toughie. It's part of our nature to be overly critical of our work, and it's not unique to us quilters. Singers and musicians are quite possibly the worst when it comes to this, but everybody has this at some point in their life. They just don't feel good enough. As our own worst critics, we often cannot see the good in what we do. And fixing this could honestly be the subject of many books and many videos, and is possibly beyond the scope of this video. But I will say, try and be kind to yourself. You're unique. Everything that you do is unique. Nobody can do it quite like you. And if everything was as picture perfect as we see on the internet, then it would probably be a little bit boring. So try to embrace imperfection, your wobbly lines, your squint seams, the points that maybe don't look as perfect as you want them to. Instead, choose to fill your projects with love and kindness. Try and think, who cares, and just enjoy it. There's no denying though, being accepted by our peers is important to us in our social standing. We all want to be accepted at some level or another. And most often or not, we do get positive feedback and praise for the things that we do. Sometimes you'll even get helpful feedback and tips on a couple of things that weren't quite right that can help you. And when they come from a place of love and kindness, they can be very helpful. But I know the thought of being laughed at or ridiculed is a very powerful demotivator. But in my experience, the thought of what might happen is actually way worse than what usually happens. And I find I've just worked myself up over nothing for no reason. And at the end of the day, and again, I know it's easier said than doing, but who cares if somebody that you've never met on the internet doesn't like it? Did you like it? Did the person that you gave it to like it? Did it bring somebody a little bit of joy in their life? Or did it show somebody how much you loved them? Because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters versus some anonymous keyboard warrior. But I know it's hard to accept this and it's hard to recognize this. And sometimes just a little bit of forward motion is all you need to do to get over that hurdle and get moving in the right direction. But above all, make a plan to tackle it. Open-ended goals like I want to do this usually rarely succeed. But be realistic about what you want to achieve in the time that you have. Make your plan and then get to sewing. So let's make a plan, okay? Start by auditing everything that you have that is waiting to be finished, and then categorize them into groups like the following. Things that may have an imminent deadline, like a gift, a birthday, etc. Things that you want to finish but are not quite as urgent. Things that you're done with and are ready to sell or gift or give away to somebody else to complete. Now here's the hard one. Look at that pile and pick out the ones that you absolutely dread sewing. As in, you would rather go and clean the oven than do these. If you're not going to gift them or give them away, then this is where you're going to start, I'm afraid. And yes, I know you hate me. I know you hate me. But you will feel amazing when you finish these quilts. Now, looking at these lists, how can we streamline these into batch processing to make tasks easier? When we get into the routine of doing something, we can get faster at it. Can we group them into anything like this? Quilts that need borders, so you can have a borders day. Quilts that are sharing backing fabric, so you can make all the sandwiches at the same time. Quilts that need rows added, so you'll have a day of doing rows. Quilts that need squaring up, or quilts that need binded. The idea is to batch process similar tasks together to be fast at it. Now take all these lists that you've made and you're going to write the list of quilts in the order that you are going to sew them, starting with the most dreaded quilts. But make sure that any imminent deadlines are first on that list so that they can be finished in time, and use your groupings from above to group them together so that they can be batch processed. And trust me again, you'll love getting those dreaded ones out the way. Now if appropriate, make yourself a schedule for how you're going to tackle this list. See how you can fit these into everything else that you have to do in your life. Don't take on too much at one time though. If you're feeling overwhelmed or it's just feeling like too big a task, you may like to use something like the Pomodoro technique to help make this more manageable. And the idea is that you set a timer for 25 minutes and you work, and then when the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break, and then at the end of that 5-minute break, you do another 25 minutes of sewing. All in all, you want to repeat that so that you do 4 blocks of 25 minutes of work with breaks in between each one, and then at the end of the 4th block, you take a longer break of your choice. And importantly, have some kind of reward for you when you finish a chunk so that you've got something nice to look forward to and to motivate you to keep going. Be warned though, your brain will say to you, I can keep going, I don't need a break, but actually the best thing you can do is stand up and walk away, stretch, take a little stroll around your house and then come back and you'll feel much more refreshed for it. If 25 minutes is too much or too overwhelming, try a smaller amount of time. Maybe try 10 minutes or even 5 minutes if it's something that you really don't want to do. Sew one line or one row of quilting and then go and take a break. What you'll find is that when you do that, then you'll be able to do 10 minutes. Then you want to do 15 and then work your way up to the 25. But do whatever increment of time you feel most comfortable with for the task at hand. When the time comes, get some loud music, get your favorite audiobook or podcast, turn the volume up, sew and have fun. So let's talk about my plan quickly so you can see how I'm putting this into action. For me, the UFO that I have avoided is because I don't know how to quilt it, and so I have put it off and put it off. However, I have now done some planning. I've tried a couple of sketches on paper and I have decided to do a shattered glass effect on this because it will be quick and easy and just requires straight lines. I'm going to tackle it first because I don't want to tackle it all and I'm going to feel amazing when I've done it. Next, I have a quilt top in progress that isn't finished. It's still strips of fabric waiting to be sewn, so I'm going to sew that first so that all my quilt tops are then at the same stage. They are quilt tops ready to be sandwiched. Then I'm going to audit what backings I bought for these quilts and then what backings I need and then what stash I have and then get some fabric ordered where required, and then I'm going to schedule in and have a day of making quilt sandwiches. Then, because I know it's painful quilting the bigger quilts first, I'm going to start with the biggest quilts. I don't have any imminent deadlines for any of these, so I'm going to tackle the biggest first, working my way to the smallest. And the reward is that the small ones are easy and fun and I can do more complicated designs on them because they are easier for me to handle. And then I'll do all the squaring up, then I'll make all the binding, then I'll attach all the binding, and then I'll finish all the binding, and then I'll cut all the threads, and then I'll be done. Then I'll celebrate with lots of wine and lots of chocolate, and then I'll decide what I'm going to keep, what I'm going to sell, and what I'm going to donate to charity. And I'm going to schedule myself time every week. I might not have the time to do this every day, but I am going to try and find myself 3 30-minute sessions a week to do this. And I'm going to post a couple of update vlogs over the course of the year and then share my progress in December so you can see how far I got with mine. And that's another little tip there. I'm using public accountability to help me with my procrastination because I've made a commitment on video to have these finished by December. So I'm going to look awfully stupid in December if we're having another conversation about procrastination. So hopefully now you know a little bit about WIPs, about some of the reasons why you might have WIPs in UFOs, some of the coping strategies you can use to get over those reasons, and then how to make a plan so that you can get to the finish line. This would be excellent to sit down and include this in your goal planning for 2022, and I do have a video about planning goals for quilters, so I'll leave a link in the description below. There are mountains and mountains of information out there about procrastination, so I'm going to leave a link to a few articles, a few videos, and a couple of books that you may find interesting if you really want to dive deeper into this topic. If you like this video, please do consider giving it a thumbs up. Why not subscribe, because I have more great videos on subjects like this coming out this year. If you want to find out how I ended up with this mountain of WIPs, why not check this video below me. Take care, and I will see you next time.